India is the second most populated country behind China. It is home to more than 1.3 billion people, but the country only accounts for a small percentage of the world's coronavirus-related deaths. The South Asian country relaxed some lockdown restrictions today, and that's even after the infection rate there picked up over the weekend. But India isn't the only country in the region experiencing lower numbers. Both Pakistan and Bangladesh, India's neighbors, are also seeing relatively low fatality rates. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab joins me now from London with more on this. Hi, Imtiaz. Great to see you. So India is the most populous country in the world, and its healthcare infrastructure would struggle to cope with a massive coronavirus outbreak. So what, if anything, is India doing differently than its Western counterparts to slow the spread of COVID-19?
Yeah, Tanya, good to talk to you. Well, at this stage, quite frankly, we can only speculate. But India, like many countries, imposed a really strict lockdown very early on into their outbreak. In fact, most experts agree that lockdowns really are a key reason for these low infection rates. But others point to something else in India. They point to the fact that India has a relatively low, or rather relatively young, population. And while we know young people can still get very, very sick from COVID-19, they are less likely to have pre-existing conditions in the way that we see in some elderly populations. Still, others believe that the hot weather in India has helped to slow the spread of the virus. Now, this bit of information is quite interesting. There's some suggestion that a less virulent strain of the virus may have come to India, meaning that it just wasn't infecting people to the degree that we've seen elsewhere. Again, at this stage, we just don't know the answer for sure, but whatever is behind this mystery, it's not being seen only in India, but also, as we've been saying, in neighboring Bangladesh and Pakistan. You know, this really makes up around a quarter of the world's population. But again, given the fact that these countries have relatively weak healthcare systems, especially for their large populations, many of whom live in poverty, this is a very welcome development that this disease has not spread across this region.
Sure, and that is an interesting possibility that the virus could have mutated into a less lethal strain there. I mean, as you said, we have no idea. Scientists still have to look into it, but we do know that the virus does mutate a little bit. So that's an interesting option to explore. The New York Times recently studied COVID-19 mortality rates in more than a dozen countries and discovered that virus-related deaths in many countries have been grossly underreported. Now, India was not featured in this particular study, but is it possible the death rate there could be higher than the data reflects?
For sure. I mean, we only have to look at where I am right now here in the United Kingdom. You know, experts believe the death toll, which, you know, is at around 30,000 right now, could actually be a lot higher. Some suggesting almost 40% higher. Now, they say the reason for that, or the reason we don't have accurate figures on numbers of people who may have died, because people may have died at home, or they may have died in nursing homes, and that hasn't been added to the official tallies. But when it comes to India, and I suppose South Asia more broadly, of course, those numbers could very well be much, much higher. But the governments in those countries say they are keeping a close watch on where they know the virus to be, whether it's spreading or not spreading, because keep in mind, South Asian countries obviously do not want an outbreak of any kind. As we've been saying, they have big populations, they have very weak health infrastructures. It would quite frankly be disastrous for them. So for now, at the very least, it looks like there is a silver lining, at least when it comes to South Asia, which has been spared a major outbreak.
Of course, India is not out of the woods yet, though. On Sunday, the country reported its largest one-day jump in coronavirus cases. So much like the rest of the world, of course, their economy is bearing the brunt of this pandemic. Is there any indication from the government in New Delhi that the country might return to relative normalcy soon, even in light of this jump in numbers?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, India, of course, is the world's largest democracy. It's also a massive economic engine globally as well. And the government there, led by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which, again, puts so much weight on what they say is their economic prowess, is really keen to get the wheels of that engine turning again. In fact, in the years since he's been Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, quite frankly, has failed to kind of bring that economic miracle that he promised in his election campaigns. He was only re-elected last year. And quite frankly, that hasn't really materialized. And this coronavirus outbreak, of course, only making things worse. And there are many people in India who are accusing him of whipping up anti-Muslim and anti-minority sentiment to deflect from his government's failings. Now, his critics say that this really has been put on display, more importantly, his government's failings have been put on display no more prominently than in those images we've seen of these millions and millions of destitute migrant workers in India, essentially left on the side of the road when that lockdown was first put into place, really to fend for themselves. Now, they have, as we've been saying, been allowed to return home. These restrictions are easing very slowly, but whatever the case, India's restrictions is still in place. The economy is still essentially in deep freeze, and the country is very, very far from business as usual. So, like many countries around the world, like many economies around the world, it's going to take a while for India to get back to business. Tanya.
Well, Imtiaz Tyab in London, we thank you so much for joining us.